Howdy, folks. I did a huge 2023 horror movie awards special last year. I covered 61 movies, I built a huge theater to present out of, there were celebrity appearances, I even wore a frickin' tuxedo, but YouTube didn't push it out to anybody. Also, more recently, YouTube has allowed dozens of fraudulent copyright claims to bring my channel's growth to a screeching halt. So 2024 has been a bit of a challenge. Some of my friends have suggested I should stop with all this silly 3D stuff. And maybe I'd also be better off if I stopped using the movie clips I'm legally entitled to use. They just think everything would be easier for me if I'd sit down and turn on the camera and say nice things about the movies the way everybody else does. So I've made some changes this year. Firstly, I've done away with all the categories from last year, so instead of being my favorite final girl or the best psychological horror, it's just going to be my top 10 best and worst movies of 2024. I know I act goofy and make a lot of jokes around here, but it doesn't mean I'm an idiot. I do know when I'm beat.
You can stand me up at the gates of hell, but
As far as I can tell, about 150 horror movies came out in 2024. Now, that's including any notable international releases, but not including any of the lesser-known independent low-budget films. Of course, I would love to cover all of them, but unfortunately, we're on a tight schedule.
When it comes to horror movies, this year was a roller coaster. There were some brilliant ones and some laughable disasters, and even a few movies that made me angry.
Without further ado, let's get stuck straight in. We're going to start with my top 10 best horrors of 2024. Number 10, it's so much potential.
Radio Silence's American horror comedy Abigail expertly balanced scares and laughs. The action sequences are slick and brutal, even those featuring a child actor. Speaking of which, 12-year-old Alicia Weir delivers a mesmerizing, blood-curdling performance that steals every scene she's in. Despite its strengths, Abigail lands at number 10 on my list for a few reasons. While the characters are visually distinct, their personalities blur together, most noticeably in the second act, where the editing didn't do many favors for the pacing. The biggest misstep, however, is Radio Silence's decision to spoil Abigail's identity in the trailers. It's a choice that undercuts the majority of the film's intrigue.
Now, obviously, the wiser choice here would have been to keep her vampirism a secret. There was even an easy way around it. Her father was a vampire too, and they showed him in the trailer, so just show him. Coming up next, number 9, a movie that almost converted me.
Scott Beck and Brian Wood's horror film Heretic challenges its audience to confront deeply held beliefs by putting its characters through harrowing tests of faith. The film compresses thousands of years of theology into a 2-hour, unflinching examination of some of life's most terrifying questions. Sophie Thatcher and Chloe East bring emotional depth to the complex material, but it's Hugh Grant's portrayal of Mr. Reed that anchors the film. Standing at the altar of this parable, his commanding presence guides Thatcher and East's performances with unwavering conviction. Also notably, the film's depiction of the LDS Church has been praised for its authenticity, and that's something not so common in religious horror movies. However, Heretic does feel a bit one-dimensional at times, leaving some of its richest subject matter completely unexplored.
Most of Heretic is dialogue. Now, it's incredibly well-written dialogue, but if you combine that with the fact the dialogue is essentially devoted to a single subject, let's just say they'd have ended up higher on my list if they explored a little bit more in terms of subject matter. Coming up next, movie number 8, which was a bit of bait and switch for some people, but not for me.
Director Benjamin Brewer's post-apocalyptic creature feature Arcadian offers a lot to unpack, with your enjoyment likely hinging on your expectations from the trailer. For me personally, the film's strength lies in its exploration of masculinity and family bonds, along with its unique creature design, a detail I found enthralling, though it may not work for everybody. One divisive aspect of Arcadian is its refusal to explain the world beyond the character's understanding of it. While this frustrated a lot of people, I felt it added to the realism of their predicaments. However, as a monster movie, the horror elements did feel a little underwhelming. That is a significant issue, but it's not the movie's biggest problem.
I think its biggest issue was Benjamin Brewer's decision to fill half of the film with what is essentially unwatchable handheld footage. I get that he was trying to convey a frenzied, panicked energy, but you can do that without sending your audience into a frenzied panic. Next up, a movie lots of people flocked to. After seeing it, many of those people decided it was for the birds.
Tillman Singer's Cuckoo follows a grieving teenager named Gretchen as she navigates loss and a distant stepfamily. This film delivers everything horror fans claim to be wanting. There's a unique premise, an unpredictable plot, an atmosphere thick with creepiness, and a blending of elements that make Cuckoo very hard to categorize. Hunter Schafer's outstanding performance as Gretchen elevates the film, which would have easily made my top 5 if not for one significant flaw. The film maintains a tense, engaging atmosphere throughout, but in the final moments of Act 2, an overly detailed explanation of the plot events felt like a jarring slap, and that slap woke me from the dreamy story world they'd worked so hard to put me in the first place.
Exposition is a personal preference, though, so I'm not knocking the film, I'm just explaining the way that scene hit me. And speaking of how scenes hit me, here's my number 6. 2024.
Chris Nash, a Canadian visual effects artist turned writer-director, shows his love for blood, guts, and gore in the slasher In a Violent Nature. Infamous now for its over-the-top violence and controversial take on the slasher subgenre, the film's told from a unique reverse perspective, maintaining the tension of a typical slasher but coming at it from a fresh new angle. The practical effects in this movie are flawless. I love the lead character, Jonny, not just for his kick-ass name either. I also felt the slasher kills in this movie set a new standard for filmmakers going forward. Placing it at number 6 on my list wasn't easy. At times, it feels like it should be my number 1. But as much as I admired Nash's bold choice for an ending, it was also very divisive, and I can understand why.
It's not like I'm allowing other people's criticisms of this film to affect my rating, because men don't do things like that. It's that sometimes I agree with the criticisms. That's why it is where it is. Next up, for a quick change of pace, let's have a look at some of my worst horrors of 2024. Brace yourselves for a little bit of sarcasm.
Bryce McGuire's supernatural horror Night Swim follows a family discovering their new house's pool is haunted. Unfortunately, nothing in this film worked for me. Every confusing scene leads into another confusing scene. Despite strong performances from Wyatt Russell and Kerry Condon, the writing prevents any kind of connection to any of the characters. Even if you try pausing the movie to piece the story together, it's a lost cause. And after the first 20 minutes, you won't want to bother. The Crow, 2024, directed by Rupert Sanders, is a supernatural superhero film that nobody asked for and even fewer liked. For a supposed love story, there's zero chemistry between Bill Skarsgård's Eric Draven and FKA Twig's Shelley Webster. There's no character development, the plot is incoherent and muddled, the pacing is so off that I can't even call it pacing. Sanders aimed for a slow burn but forgot to include any kind of build-up or emotional payoff at the end. If you're a fan of Brandon Lee's original, this film will feel like an insult to you. Chris Weitz wrote, directed, and produced Afraid, a film about a family whose home AI system increasingly inserts itself into their lives. Produced by Blumhouse, who also made Megan 2 years earlier, Afraid feels like a poor ripoff of that film. The plot is 100% predictable, the characters are impossible to care about, the actors seem uninterested themselves, and the AI's reach is so exaggerated that it's unbelievable. If you want to see a company attempt to replicate its own success while hoping you don't notice they're doing it, check out Afraid. But honestly, I'd just wait for Megan 2. The Strangers, Chapter 1 is an American horror film supposedly directed by Rennie Harlan. The story follows two characters terrorized in a house in the woods by masked strangers, just like all the other Stranger films. To me, this movie was pure comedy. If you want to laugh, check out my review. There's no originality, no suspense, and the characters are so stereotyped I had to make fun of them myself. The film goes as far as to defy the laws of physics to create tension in an early scene, though between you and I, it didn't even succeed at that. Apartment 7A is an American supernatural horror movie directed by Natalie James. It's meant to be a prequel to the legendary Rosemary's Baby. Unfortunately, it feels more like a high school film project from someone who didn't understand the original film. Despite a fantastic cast, including Diane Weiss and Julia Gardner, Apartment 7A is a photocopy of the original on wet paper. This movie was supposed to dig deeper into Terry Giannoffrio's minor character from the original film, but it failed to provide any new backstory. The horror and suspense were literally non-existent, and Julia Gardner's character was boring and flat. It ranks 6 on my list because I had a space between 5 and 7, and I didn't want to waste any more thought on it.
Let's jump back into my worst list again. I'm guessing I'm going to catch some static over number 5.
Alien Romulus did really well, especially compared to other recent additions to the franchise, but I can't fake enthusiasm for it. The film looked great, aesthetically speaking, but that's about all I can say about it. My review pointed out at least 50 instances where director Fede Alvarez lifted scenes or props and dialogue from other movies. And if I wasn't stuck keeping an eye on my review's runtime, I'm sure I could have found 100. If you've never seen an Alien movie, and I suspect that might be the cause for some of the people responsible for this, Romulus might seem like a decent watch, especially compared to some of the other films released this year. But as an actual fan of this franchise, this feels like a blatant, lazy cash grab ripoff. Tarot is an American supernatural joke of a film written and directed by Spencer Cohen and Anna Hallberg. Story follows a group of college kids who start dying in strange, gruesome ways after playing with a deck of tarot cards. I reviewed this movie and it's astounding for none of the right reasons. The plot's predictable, not just because the writing is infantile, but because Cohen and Hallberg decided it would be wise to tell you exactly what's going to happen to each character at the start of the movie. Every one of the characters is a vacuous stereotype, and if there was any directing going on, I missed it. For a film called Tarot, it even gets all the tarot practices wrong. And even I know that as a middle-aged straight guy. The Exorcism 2024 is from Joshua John Miller. If his name sounds familiar, it's because he was the creepiest child actor to ever hold a Screen Actors Guild card. His last name comes from his dad, Jason Miller, aka Father Damien Karras from The Exorcist. I refuse to go any deeper into this movie because nothing about it makes any sense. It's kind of like The Exorcist story, but not really. This movie is awful, and if you end up checking it out to see if I'm exaggerating, don't tell me about it, because I don't want to know. Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey 2 is yet another attempt by Reese Fake Waterfield and Matt Leslie to flood the film industry with their films. You might notice as we get closer to number 1 on this worst of list that I have less and less to say. To me, Waterfield and Leslie represent everything wrong with modern horror. They lack originality and sincerity, and they are driven solely by money and fame. That's something they'll proudly tell you themselves. When Winnie the Pooh went public domain, these two dove on it to make sure they were first. They're hollow, boring people. This movie could have easily been number 1 on my worst of list, but I don't feel right about giving them the top spot in anything.
And now I am smiling again because it's time to go back to my top 5 horrors of 2024.
Oddity is an Irish horror film by Damien McCarthy, who you may know from his previous film Caveat. The story follows a blind medium who owns a curiosity shop and is investigating her twin sister's murder. Much like Caveat, Oddity is packed with atmospheric tension. In the opening scene, McCarthy establishes an unsettling and clever tone with a supernatural mystery twist. As an Irish person, I am familiar with this type of folklore, but McCarthy presents it in a fresh and engaging way. This movie explores themes of family and infidelity within an authentically creepy setting. Caroline Bracken's flawless dual performance as the twin sisters will make you question the lengths you'd go to for your own family. The less said about this one, the better. Sometimes a horror movie isn't about its plot. It's about how it makes you feel in your guts. This film starts with a teenager preparing for a night out and descends into a kind of chaos that feels terrifyingly plausible. From start to finish, the atmosphere grips you without letting go. While the premise isn't exactly new, the execution is unlike anything I have ever seen before. Mads is also a groundbreaking achievement in its technical mastery. The entire film takes place in several locations within a small city, but it's shot in a single continuous take. There's no shortcuts, no editing, just one seamless spectacle perfectly accented with realistically unsettling horror elements. Smile 2 is a psychological, supernatural horror film written and directed by Parker Finn, also the mind behind the original Smile. The fact my number 3 horror pick of 2024 is a sequel says a lot about its quality. Most modern sequels and prequels rely heavily on franchise loyalty to cash in on, and it's usually a disappointment for the loyal fans. A great sequel should honor the original and raise the stakes while it's bringing fresh ideas. And Smile 2 delivers on all of those fronts. Not only does it meet these expectations, but it surpasses its predecessor in terms of horror and pacing and its exploration of themes like mental health and the detrimental effects of fame. While Saucy Bacon shone in the original, Naomi Scott's portrayal of Sky Riley blew me away. Her performance captured everything from apathy to explosive rage with total authenticity. Combined with the film's relentless pacing, Smile 2 comes close to being a perfect horror movie. It's one I absolutely did not see coming. Longlegs is an American police procedural, supernatural, occult horror thriller mystery movie that draws inspiration from a wide range of sources. Written and directed by Osgood Perkins, whom I already considered horror royalty after The Blackcoat's Daughter in 2015, Longlegs has now catapulted him into potential tattoo territory for me. On paper, the premise of Longlegs seems entirely unremarkable. An FBI agent is tasked with tracking down a serial killer. But days and even weeks after watching the movie, the plot will come back to you in fuzzy, fractured fragments like dreamy afterthoughts. Of course, Perkins did this intentionally. I just can't for the life of me figure out how. To keep things short and spoiler-free, this simple premise evolves into something I have so much difficulty articulating that I still haven't even finished my review. Nicolas Cage delivers exactly what's needed to create an unnerving, unsettling, kooky, and delirious serial killer, and Micah Monroe convinces you that something is fundamentally off-kilter about her. You'll never quite figure out what it is, and you'll never get comfortable with it either. But the real hero of this film is Osgood Perkins, who creates a feeling of dread that I can't compare to any other movie I've ever seen. I'll admit this movie is special to me, and it would have been my number 1, but I don't fully understand every aspect of it yet, so I have more digging to do.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is what we have all been waiting for. My worst horror movie of 2024 is...
Manoj Neliatu Shyamalan is an American filmmaker who burst onto the scene in 1999 with his supernatural thriller The Sixth Sense. A lot of people called it a perfect movie back then, myself included, but since its release, Shyamalan has never been able to replicate the film's success. You might be surprised to see this as my worst horror of the year. I did have 150 movies to choose from after all, and Shyamalan is a Hollywood veteran, but that's exactly why I picked him. In a lot of ways, Trap is typically M. Night. The dialogue is awkward and turbulent. The plot feels like a series of implausible, highly convenient events strung together after just a few minutes worth of writing. The acting is intentionally eccentric, and there is a twist ending that misses the mark by 100 miles. By now, we expect this from Shyamalan. It's become his trademark. But this time around, his big ultimate twist felt so underhanded to me, it's earned Trap my coveted Worst Horror of the Year title. Shyamalan used this movie as a vehicle to promote his daughter's singing career in real life, to the extent that every other element of filmmaking took a back seat. The shots of her singing were perfect, but there's no suspense in the story. You don't know who you're rooting for because you don't know who the main character is. The plot conveniences are staggering, and the plot itself is illogical and lazy. How does this happen with a Hollywood veteran, you ask? He didn't care what the audience thought. Trap is a middle finger to movie fans. And my calling it my worst horror movie of 2024 is my middle finger back.
Can you guess what number 1 is? If I'm honest, I'm a little bit surprised myself.
Late Night with the Devil is a supernatural horror directed by Australian siblings Colin and Cameron Cairns, and it's set during a Halloween night talk show in 1977. This movie is my number 1 simply because it was a hell of a lot of fun to watch. That's partly due to my nostalgia for the era, I suppose. As a kid, I fell asleep to these late night shows, and Late Night with the Devil captures the aesthetic perfectly. It also taps into the 70s real-life satanic panic phenomenon, uses uses it for a much-needed ratings boost. David Dastmalchian plays the late-night host Jack Delroy. He embodies the plastic, rehearsed mannerisms of the era with uncanny authenticity. While some critics have mentioned inconsistencies with the found footage format and the visual effects, I think they might have missed the point. The visuals honored the 70s aesthetic accurately and authentically, and to me, that gave this movie a charm I haven't seen in popular horror in a really long time. I would love to say more, but in keeping this spoiler-free, I will just recommend this unique and refreshing take on a classic concept to anybody who hasn't seen it already.
That was my year in horror movies, folks. I would love to hear your number ones, both good and bad, down in the comments section. I'd also like to take a minute right now to thank you for 2024. Now then, folks, in terms of channel growth, 2024 has been really up and down. But I am starting to recognize I have literally no control over the down parts. So I am learning to accept that, so I'm hopefully not as annoyed by it. I'm not there yet. I'm not there yet at all, but I will be. The up parts, that's been you guys. I've been lucky enough to get to know some of you guys through our shared love of usually terrible horror movies. And the more I do this, the more I'm really understanding that's actually what this is all about for me. So, thank you for watching my videos in 2024. I'll be back soon with a brand new video. I wish you the very best in 2025. And until next time, folks.